It's great to see you all here today. Our director, Professor Pete Shirlow, sends his apologies. Unfortunately, he's had to go to Dublin to speak to representatives of the Irish government about something. So he would be here this afternoon otherwise. I know that Pete's extremely proud of the fact that the Institute of Irish Studies is supporting this project and that we've been involved in that, and I know others will talk about that. But absolutely delighted to see the project get to this stage, and we very much look forward to the different stages to come. So the first person I would like to call forward just to say a few words is the Consul General for the North West of England, Sarah Mangan. So Sarah, if you don't mind, thank you.
Thank you, Gerry, and I suppose I'll start by thanking the Institute of Irish Studies for hosting us here today. I have been asked to speak because one of the funders of this project is the Emigrant Support Programme, which is run by the Government of Ireland. And as the Irish Government's representative in the north of England, I was coming anyway because since we established the consulate just coming up to 2 years ago, part of our role here is to celebrate and highlight the stories of the Irish in Britain and the stories of the Irish, particularly in the north of England. But you find that while you hear lots of stories, academic research into what the Irish are doing in this part of the world, there isn't an awful lot of it. So projects like this are gold dust, and we're really delighted to be able to support it. And really, I'm interested to hear about the stories because I think it's a particular part of the Irish contribution, I suppose, to Britain that is very deserving of being highlighted because it was so crucial at a time that when the NHS was being set up and the huge need for additional staff, that these provided an opportunity for Irish people at a time when our country was not doing the best, I would say. And then the contribution that those people made, I think, shaped not only the NHS, but shaped Irish communities that were here. And also, I think, shaped Britain more broadly because you've got such a mix of different nationalities coming into the NHS. And the Irish were very much a part of that and contributing to the diversity that exists today. So we don't want their story to be lost. So we're really grateful to Grainne and to Louise and to Neha for all of the work that they're putting into this project. And really, I'm just here to hear the stories. And thank you so much. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And just to add to the words of welcome today, could I just particularly welcome Dame Lorna Muirhead here as well, who's a former president of the Royal College of Midwives, former Lord Lieutenant of Liverpool, and actually, I think, has just been given the freedom of the city of Liverpool, I believe, in recent months. So you're very, very welcome, Dame Lorna. Great to see you here today. Okay, so moving along, I would like you to introduce you to Professor Louise Ryan, who's leading this project. So Louise, come and join us and tell us about the work that you've been doing. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Gerry. And Neha and I will be doing this part of the presentation, and then we'll hand over to Grainne, who's going to be talking about the podcasts. So we're absolutely delighted to be here today, to be back in Liverpool. We were here in September, and we were working with Irish Community Care and the Irish Centre, and we're delighted that people are here from those organisations today because you made it possible for us to come to Liverpool, and we did 9 interviews in 3 days in Irish Community Care, and we're very grateful to Breege and her team for all the help they gave us. And we're thrilled that so many of the nurses that we spoke to on those days are here in the room with us today. So it's really lovely. And they're all very dressed up in their summer clothes. So it's wonderful to see you all here today. And a huge thank you to the Liverpool Institute of Irish Studies, who have part-funded this project and particularly who made the Liverpool leg of this project possible. And of course to Sarah from the Consulate, who as she said, the Irish government, the Irish Abroad Unit are one of the largest funders of this research. So we're very grateful, and it's wonderful to have Sarah here too today. So without further ado, I'll just get started, and then I'll hand over to Neha. So we've got some nice pictures. It's always good to start with pictures. It kind of gets everybody in the mood that we're going to be talking about back in the 50s and 60s. So, as you all know, it's the 75th anniversary of the NHS, actually on the 5th of July, so we're just a few weeks away from the 75th anniversary. And really, right from the establishment of the NHS in 1948, they were going to Ireland recruiting, actively recruiting student nurses to come over here and to train in the NHS. It was apparent from the very first of the NHS that they just wouldn't be able to staff it without relying on trainees coming in from abroad. And I think this is the part of the story that we really want to tell, because we know that the NHS is held in such high esteem in this country, and rightly so, but to really celebrate the contribution that Irish women and men, and we did have 2 men as well in our project, made to the NHS. So advertisements were placed in national and provincial newspapers right from 1948. And it was fascinating for us to go back and look at some of those old advertisements, because they weren't just put in like the Irish Times or the Irish Independent or the big national dailies, but even in really small provincial newspapers, these advertisements come to England, come to Britain, come and work in the NHS, were being placed right from 1948. Now, at the time, it was very difficult to train as a nurse in Ireland. It was very expensive. You had to pay fees. You had to buy your own uniform. So only those people who were quite well off, upper middle class people, could afford to train as a nurse in Ireland. On the other hand, if you came to train as a nurse here in Britain, not only did you get paid while you trained, but you also had the opportunity of live-in accommodation in the nurses' homes. And the nurses' homes were quite pivotal, and we've heard some great stories about the nurses' homes. And so there was a real pull to attract these young Irish people, mainly women, but some men, to come over here and to train as a nurse. And as a result, by the 1960s, around 11% of all nurses recruited to hospitals in the southeast of England were born in the Irish Republic. And by 1971, it's estimated that there were around 31,000 Irish-born nurses in Britain, making up about 12% of all nursing staff. So we're really talking about very, very big numbers here. So the aims of our project are to relate the hitherto untold story of the Irish women and men who made up the large proportion of migrant nurses recruited to work in those early decades of the NHS. Ours is a 3-year project, so we started last year, 2022, and we'll go on until the end of 2024. And we're telling those stories through photography, through digital recording, and you'll hear more about that in a little while. We're making a film, and we are also writing a book. So it's a kind of an all-singing, all-dancing project. We're very ambitious, and we just keep finding new and exciting things to do. So yeah, we've got some lovely old black and white pictures here. The further aims of the study are to explore why these women and some men, sorry, I kind of forgot the men. We do have 2 men in the project, so I must amend this. To explore why these young people left Ireland as teenagers, usually about 18 years of age, to train as nurses, to examine their experiences of training and professional roles as nurses within the NHS, to understand how they negotiated their Irish identities in Britain, particularly during decades when it wasn't easy to be Irish in this country. And we also want to analyse the role of friendship, of networks, of families and colleagues as sources of support and also of socialising for these young migrants. To learn about relationships with Ireland, we know that many of these young people were sending remittances. They were sending money back to their parents and to younger siblings in Ireland. And then, of course, to follow them through the ageing process, to talk about their own retirement and their plans, whether to return to Ireland or continue to live here. And then to continue that conversation about how they forged a sense of an Irish identity and an Irish community outside of Ireland. Now, just very briefly to tell you how the project came about. So it builds on 2 earlier projects. So I did a small study with Irish nurses back in the early 2000s, and I've published a few papers on that, and that's become quite widely cited and recognised as sort of pioneering, said she modestly, pioneering research in the field. And then in 2021, Grainne, who's sitting here and who will be speaking in the next presentation, produced a documentary, Angels of Mercy, which was broadcast on News Talk Radio to very wide acclaim, and it went on to win some prizes. You'll see them there. Grainne invited me to be a talking head on this documentary that she made, a radio documentary. And it was while we were having those conversations that the idea emerged of getting together and really building on my original research, the work that Grainne had done for the documentary, to pool our resources and to write a book. And we literally sort of set out with this very vague idea that we were going to write a book about these Irish nurses. And then it just grew and grew from there. The more we kind of did, the more opportunities arose for us to do more and more. So it is an ever-expanding project. And now I'm going to hand over to Neha, who's going to tell you more about the participants.
So as Louise has kind of explained the context, I'll just tell you a bit more about what our research really entailed, who we interviewed, where we went to interview. So our project began in February 2022 by interviewing 21 women in London. We then moved to Liverpool in September 2022 and completed 9 interviews in Liverpool. You'll actually see some of the things that our nurses talked about in relation to Liverpool later on. But we also then interviewed in Wales, Huddersfield, Middlesbrough and Manchester, as well as Luton and Leeds. And then in spring, we also managed to interview some people from Scotland. So as you can see, the project really grew, really expanded. And I'll mention this later on, but we have obviously a lot of contributors that we'd like to thank. It's really thanks to them that we've been lucky enough to really expand our project. So overall, we have 45 interviews in total. Just to mention a few people who've been kind of fundamental in our recruitment of Irish nurses. So the London Irish Centre, Liverpool Irish Community Care, Luton Irish Forum, Manchester Irish World Heritage Centre, so on. The funders they've really helped with, not funders, sorry, they have helped with recruitment. In terms of ethics, we were very, conscious of making sure that our nurses' kind of rights and well-being were protected. So the participants are anonymised, and as we write up the book, we kind of aren't going to mention people's names just to protect anything that our nurses kind of were saying that they wanted to especially keep kind of anonymous. And obviously we got kind of ethical improvement from London Met as well, which is where Louise and I are doing our research. So we're now going to focus on the Liverpool part, which is, I guess, what most of you are here for, which is very exciting. We travelled to Liverpool and undertook 9 interviews on the 28th and 29th of September 2022. We didn't actually set out, we didn't expect necessarily that we would have any male participants, but we actually did, and we actually had one from Liverpool who was a psychiatric nurse. Our Liverpool participants ranged in age from 68 to 92, so really quite an age, which also meant that we were lucky enough to interview people who, came really at the start of the NHS, which was, very exciting to hear about those stories. So of the 9 people interviewed, 4 arrived in the 1950s, 5 in the 1960s. The earliest arrival was 1951, so only 3 years after the NHS was born. And the latest was 1968. All of them except one are now retired. So this is a picture of some of the nurses in their uniform, actually. This was from Bernie, who was a London nurse. Just a lovely picture, really. Okay. So just to quickly mention some people who helped us recruit in Liverpool. We'd like to thank Breach McDade from the Director of Irish Community Care, Margaret Lake, who is the Outreach Support Worker, Gerrry Diver, who is Strategy and Innovation Officer at the Institute of Irish Studies, and we'd like to just thank them all. Really appreciate all of the support. Right, so going on to some of our findings. So we asked participants if they'd always wanted to be nurses. And some had. Some said, one of them said, I always wanted to be a nurse. It sounded very interesting. But as Louise mentioned, it was very difficult in Ireland at the time to become a nurse for various reasons. One of them was the expense, so you had to pay a fee, as well as buy the uniform. Whereas I guess in the UK, in Britain, not the UK, in Britain, you would, when you were recruited with a small kind of bursary, I suppose, or small payment, but you were also given accommodation, as well as training for free. So that made it feasible for a lot of our nurses to actually kind of live up to their dreams. Yes, so as one of our participants said, it was more difficult to become a student in Ireland than it was here, and that's why there's quite a lot of Irish in hospitals here. The NHS also took active recruitment of student nurses, as Louise has mentioned. So we had a participant who said it was in the local newspaper. I remember the name of it. The Northern Constitution was the name of the paper. We'll actually have some pictures in the book of kind of old recruitment advertisements. So I hope you do manage to get a hold of the book. Many participants applying to do nurse training as well came from kind of big families, and so it was, often that they were doing it for financial considerations. Most that we interviewed didn't necessarily aspire to come to England per se, but it was more pragmatic. In fact, most of ours said that they wanted to return to Ireland afterwards. So a quote from a participant: "We come from a big family, and there was very little money, and we had a smallish farm." The journey as well was quite memorable for some, actually, particularly the boat journey, which was more of an infamous journey, really. I think it was the nearest thing to Ireland, and it was easy to get across on boat. That's why a lot of them came to England. But they have quite vivid memories of travelling with cattle on boats. So I came on a boat, and the boats at that time came into Birkenhead, and they used to call them the cattle boats. Loads of cattle on them, very little people on them, but lots of cattle on them. So yeah, and just to expand on it, though, it was horrible, awful. We couldn't get a seat going over. There were only benches. So people remember these journeys of having to go, often as well when they returned to go visit family, they would sort of dread the journey over.
Thanks, Neha. Okay, so you'll be hearing more about the cattle boat in a minute, and that also crops up on the excerpts from the podcast. So most of the nurses that we interviewed had very fond memories of their training. So one lady said, who arrived in Liverpool in the 1960s, "I just remember I loved it. I just loved every bit of it. It was tough, and student nurses particularly got a hard time to start with until you proved your worth. So I just loved it so much. I just did everything I was told, and I studied as well, but we did have fun because all the Irish nurses were there." And this was often a very sort of common story we heard, that it was hard work, you were studying and working at the same time, but you also had fun. Now, of course, as most of you in the room will know, unlike nurse training today, which is done in universities and is a university degree, training in those days was really done on the job. It was practice-based training. So nurses were recruited at the age of 18. They were in the PTS, they were in the sort of pre-nursing training school for a few weeks, and then they were on the wards. At a very, very young age, they were right in there, thrown in at the deep end on the wards. As one nurse who arrived from the west of Ireland in the mid-1960s, she described her early experiences of going on the wards. She said, "When I first went on the wards, the very first day, I'd never been in a hospital. I'd never been on a ward. I knew nothing about it." And this was often common, that many of the nurses had grown up in rural areas. They'd never been to hospital, and now suddenly, after only a few weeks in the job, they were running a ward. And these were big wards, not like now where wards can be quite small. This was the old Nightingale model, where you could have 30 beds on a ward. So these long, narrow wards with loads and loads of beds. So a very big sense of responsibility for like 18-year-olds. So this could result in some surprising and embarrassing encounters. As one lady said, I'd never seen anybody naked ever before. I was so embarrassed. And we have a lot of funny stories about bed baths, particularly giving men bed baths. And you can just imagine, you know, your 18-year-old daughter, if you have an 18-year-old daughter, and being asked to give a man a bed bath. It was quite an undertaking. But overall, our participants stated that Irish nurses were really valued as hard workers. And this is something we've heard again and again, that Irish nurses were really hard workers, often because they came from farming backgrounds or they came from big families. They were used to having to work. They hadn't been pampered. They'd been helping out at home from a young age. They were hard workers. They were reliable and conscientious. So as another participant said, they were good workers and they didn't complain. Nobody complained about anything, you just put up with it. If you were told to do something, if you were told to go and clean all the bedpans, you just did it. That was the way it was. So for young Irish teenagers moving away from home for the very first time, the nurse's home proved to be absolutely key. This was a significant place of comfort and security, and it was often where they made new friendships. As another nurse said, who had come from a poor family in the Irish Midlands, she loved the nursing home. She says the nurse's home was really lovely. And of course, there was a big dining hall. It was just lovely. It was like a hotel. It was kind of a cross between a hotel and a boarding school in many ways. So several nurses recalled the great camaraderie amongst the other students in the nurses' homes. When somebody would go home on holiday and then they would bring back food, lovely fruitcakes and stuff like that, and then we'd all meet in that person's room and we'd all have whatever they'd brought back with them and share it out between you. They were teenagers, they were always hungry, and they were working very hard as well, so fruitcake was a real favourite. And of course, we asked all of the participants about their uniform, to describe their uniform. And the story we heard again and again was how much they preferred the old uniform to the way that nurses dress now. No offence to any current nurses who might be in the room, but the nurses' scrubs and kind of trainers were not really held in very high esteem. Most people said that they preferred the old-fashioned uniform, as they said. One said, an absolutely wonderful woolen cape with red fleece inside for the winter. And many participants said that the whole uniform is different. I think it's terrible. They go around wearing trainers at work. They should dress as nurses properly did in the olden days. So I think, again, it was also about status, and we heard vivid descriptions about how the uniform would change every year. So it was a bit like the army when you'd get your stripes. So you'd had different coloured belts so people would know if you were a student or if you were a ward sister. They could tell immediately by looking at your uniform. So people felt very proud as well of the status they'd achieved through all their hard work and passing exams and everything. Now, as we've mentioned, of course, this was all happening in Liverpool. We're talking about the nurses we interviewed in Liverpool, and we couldn't pass up the opportunity to ask them about the social scene in Liverpool. And as we mentioned earlier, these were young people who worked hard and played hard. In the main, they had fun as well. So they talked a lot about the Irish clubs at the time in Liverpool. So one told us it was upstairs in the centre of Liverpool. There were 6 flights of stairs up, and they used to call it the Shamrock. That was the name of it. And a lot of men and women, they met their wives and partners there, you know. We heard a lot about the Shamrock. And actually many people mentioned going up these flights of stairs to this not very glamorous venue. And another talked about, again, the Irish clubs in Liverpool in the 60s. I started to go to the Irish Centre, the old Irish Centre, and then we used to go on a Saturday night and all the big Irish bands would be playing there on a Sunday night. It was very good. So, you know, people had these kinds of friendship networks in the hospital with other nurses in the nurses' home, and then they also had that Irish cultural scene in Liverpool in the swinging 60s, and we heard a lot about that. And then about being Irish in Liverpool, and as we heard earlier, many of the nurses chose to come to Liverpool particularly. Some of them had options to go and train in other parts of Britain, but they particularly chose Liverpool because they thought it was geographically closer to Ireland. You could just hop over in the ferry, though it wasn't quite a hop over in the ferry, but also culturally it felt that it was kind of closer to Ireland as well. So one of our participants, who was originally from Dublin, noted the similarities between Ireland and Liverpool. She said, "I find the Liverpool people actually very funny, and a lot of their sayings are quite a lot like Irish sayings." But a few people did say that they had initially struggled with the accent. "It was strange at first, and my accent were, 'What did you say, Paddy?' Everyone called you Paddy. It was no good protesting. That was the way it was. And I had to repeat myself all the time. I couldn't understand them, and they couldn't understand me." So, but they got there, and yeah, it was more in the beginning that people had that kind of lack of familiarity with the accents. Now, Liverpool was generally perceived as very friendly, and people all said how friendly Liverpool was. Nonetheless, some of the nurses did say that they had some negative experiences. Somebody talked about the shock of discovering sectarianism in Liverpool. "I didn't realise that Liverpool was quite sectarian. I didn't know. I didn't realise. The first time, I think, was when I saw an Orange Order parade thing." Several nurses had encountered anti-Irish sentiments, particularly at the time of the IRA bombing campaign. So another interviewee who had moved to Liverpool in the 50s and trained as a psychiatric nurse before doing his general training. Now, you know, this is our male participant. We have to work harder at disguising the identity of the participants. So he explained this particular incident that had occurred when he was on the wards. He said, "This woman on the ward I was working, she made out that I was to blame for it. She made slight remarks about the situation, the IRA bombings and that, you know." And this was not unusual. Across the 45 interviews that we've done around Britain, people often described that there was this peak of anti-Irish sentiment, of people making nasty remarks whenever there was an IRA incident at the time. So this was quite a common pattern in the data. So we focused a lot on recruitment and training, and it's interesting, when we were interviewing people, they tended to talk quite a lot about their training, because I think those 3 years really stood out in their memory. Those 3 years were often really important and filled with all sorts of new and exciting experiences. But of course, we also wanted to know how people's careers developed and what they went on to do over, in some cases, the next 50 years of their careers. So one participant said, "I do reckon nursing is a vocation. I don't think it is anymore," she adds, kind of half under her breath. But we did hear a lot about this, that nursing was a vocation, that you didn't go into nursing for the money, certainly not for the money, but that it was something that you really had this love for, the vocation of being a nurse and caring for people. But many participants were critical of how the nursing profession had changed over time. Nursing has changed, and a lot of it is done in university. It's considered a university course. But then, back in the 50s and 60s, it was hands-on, on the wards, and then block training every so often. You'd get 2 or 3 weeks academic, and then that went on for 3 years. So people had that sense that the practical, applied way of learning nursing on the wards, they felt that was better than going to university. That is not something you should be saying in a university. I'm very aware of that. We've just launched a new nursing programme at my university, so I think we'll have to edit that bit out when I'm presenting this at London Met. And of course, the people that we were interviewing, we were talking to them often about their youth. We were asking them to talk to us about when they were 18, to tell us their memories of the journey, their memories of their uniform. But of course, we were talking to them as the mature ladies and gentlemen that they are today. And what was really fascinating was the continued importance of Irish centres, that Irish centres had been important to them in the 60s. As young people, that's where they went to listen to the bands, to do the dancing, to meet other friends and socialise. And now, in their mature age, I'm being very diplomatic because they're listening to me, in their mature years, still the Irish Centre proved to be so important. And we were interviewing in 2022, so it was just after the pandemic, just after the lockdown, and many people spoke about how they'd missed the Irish Centre during the lockdown and how glad they were that everything was opened up again, that they were able to go back to the afternoon tea dances, that they were able to go back to socialising and meeting their friends. And we just heard so many positive remarks about the key role that the Irish centres in Liverpool play, and Irish community care, and all of the provisions that are there looking after our older people. So Nurse 25, who was a very sprightly 89-year-old but lived alone, really explained the key role of the Irish Centre. I'm in the Irish Club mainly at weekends, so I'm mixing still with Irish people. And another nurse who's widowed in her 80s says she still enjoys dancing. I go to the tea dances, which are really good when you're retired. So that continuity was so special and so important. So just to kind of bring this part to a close before I hand over to Grainne. So what we're going to do is we're having photographic exhibitions. We'll produce an archive of sound recordings. We're going to have a series of podcasts, and you'll hear all about the podcasts in a minute. We're also making a film. This was a new thing. We weren't planning on making a film, but now we're making a film. And we're going to be writing a book as well. So there will be a book, which I think will make a wonderful present for Christmas for all of your grandchildren and children and everybody. But not this Christmas. So by 2024, this book will be available, and we'll make sure that you all are aware when the book is finished. No word of this book has been written yet. So this is my next big project, but it will happen. The contract has been signed. The book is coming. And so again, just to thank our funders, the very first funding we had actually was from the Irish Nurses and Midwives organisation, then the London Irish Centre, the Liverpool Institute, the Burdett Trust for Nursing, and of course the Irish Department of Foreign Affairs Irish Abroad Unit. So we're very thankful to all of those. So we'll stop there. We'll come back to the cards in a minute. And I don't know if we want to take any quick Q&A or we should just go straight over to the podcasts. Any quick? Oh, we've got a hand up at the back. Yeah, we just take 5 minutes maybe of Q&A, and then we'll hand over to you, Grainne.
I remember my aunt telling me when the first day on the ward, she was walking along and somebody shouted nurse, and she just carried on. She realised what it was. I'm wondering whether the qualifications that the nurses got in Britain were able to be used back in Ireland if anyone ever went back to do that.
Yeah, well, some of them did go back, but we were only interviewing people who'd stayed. But yes, I mean, as I think Neha said at the outset, most people, when they came, the expectation was that they were going to come, they were going to train because of all the opportunities to train here, and then they would go back and work in Ireland. But obviously, we interviewed those who didn't go back. But we know that some nurses went back, but some went to Australia, some went to Canada, some went to the US. So once they had achieved their training, I think the NHS training was very highly regarded. It was often then a sort of a gateway to the world in many ways. And some of our nurses did go abroad, at least one or two. I don't think the Liverpool, maybe, but some of our other nurses did go to America and then came back to work in the NHS. Of course, yes. Do you want to come to the microphone, Neha?
So what we heard from some nurses who, because we did ask them the question of what they would perceive their career to be like if they had stayed in Ireland, and a lot say even like returning to Ireland, they would still be limited in their opportunities. So I mean, we are talking about kind of the 70s, 80s, and they did say that the opportunity to progress, a lot of the women were able to kind of move. I say women, but to be honest, all of them. Were able to move up the ranks and even sort of use their nursing degrees to maybe become lecturers or policy advisors or whatnot, in a way that they say that in Ireland they would have struggled to do. They would have been, I guess, more, I guess there would have been less mobility is what they say.
Yeah, definitely smaller opportunity, fewer opportunities. Yeah.
This morning I heard on the radio a short clip as I got in the car, and it was interviews with nurses from the Windrush generation, and I wondered whether at any point there was any discussion of the differing experience of international. I was struck by the very first picture that you showed, and there were obviously nurses who were part of that generation in that photograph.
Yeah.
And whether there was any exploration of a different experience and perhaps increased racism as opposed to, racism or anti-Irish sentiment, which,
Yeah. So many of our participants talked about the diversity of the student sets. So if we go back, I'll make you all dizzy now by jumping back to the beginning. But yes, as you can clearly see in this photograph, it is so diverse. And what I think is quite interesting is, I mean, obviously you'd expect a lot of Caribbean nurses. That didn't surprise me. But you have a lot of, I think, Hong Kong and Chinese and potentially some Filipino nurses there as well. And this picture was taken, I think, in 1960 or 61. So the diversity was there right from the beginning. And what many of our Irish nurses say is that the reason why there were so many migrant nurses from all over the world is because very few English girls wanted to be nurses. And we've heard this time and time again, that it was not an attractive career for English girls, perhaps because they felt they had lots of other options, lots of office jobs, lots of clerical jobs, whereas for people coming from other parts of the world, maybe nursing was held in quite high esteem as a really good career for a woman. But yes, we've heard a lot about that kind of reliance on these different migrants coming in from abroad. Most people have said that, you know, in the nurse's home, it would have been like the United Nations in the nurse's home, and that everybody was away from home, everybody got on together, everybody supported each other. This is what we've heard. Yeah. Any other questions before we hand over? There'll be opportunity for more questions later, maybe. So maybe we'll pause there and we'll hand over to Grainne. So thank you very much.
Good afternoon. It's lovely to meet you here today, everybody. And thank you for hosting us, Gerrry and Sarah and Breach, and particularly all the ladies and the gentlemen that we met last year. It was my first trip to Liverpool, and those people that we interviewed brought me personally on a journey that was very humbling. Now, I was a nurse myself, and I've been there, done that as well, worked for 17 years in the NHS. But the stories that came from these people, few of them are in the room, was nothing short of amazing, absolutely amazing. And they came to Liverpool at a time when life was hard, and you could feel it coming from them. It was very emotional. It was very, very emotional. And it comes in the voices. And I want to sort of play you some voices of these people that we met last year. And they're just little vignettes of what Louise and Neha said on the PowerPoint presentation. But we're bringing the voices to life, and that is a wonderful opportunity and a wonderful privilege for me personally, and for us as a team, to be able to do this. And I want to thank you, Liverpool, and the University of Liverpool, for letting us do this. I want to thank the people who trusted us to tell their story. So without further ado, I'll just play a few voices, and this is a little taster before we launch the main podcast for Liverpool called The Liverpool Story. And that will be launched on the 5th of July, which is the 75th anniversary of the National Health Service. So it's a very proud moment. Be very proud for what you've done. It's fantastic. Okay. I'll be narrating the voices as well as we're playing them, so bear with me. Okay, the first voice that we hear is Rita, and she was just 17 years old when she travelled to Liverpool in 1954 as a cadet nurse.
Somebody that had just come over here to Liverpool, we got talking to her, and myself and two other girls decided to come over with her. It was all arranged for us anyway. We were only young girls, like, you know. Of course, we wouldn't have known where to go or anything like that. We'd never been before to Liverpool or anywhere like that. That's how we started off as a cadet with the nuns and that.
She remembers travelling on the cattle boat from Dublin to Liverpool.
I do. Oh, it was awful, that, yes, and horrible. The bunks in the... We couldn't get... Did we get a seat coming over? I can't remember whether we did or not. There were only like benches. Did we have bunks? There was bunks downstairs. So, yeah. So I remember them as well. It was like a cattle boat.
And I didn't realise there was cattle on the boat. I thought it was just the name of the boat, like the Inishfallen or something like that. Annie too came to Liverpool on the cattle boat.
I came on the boat, and the boats at that time came into Birkenhead, and they used to call them the cattle boats. Yeah.
Were there any cattle on them?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, there were cattle.
Oh yeah, loads of cattle on them. Yeah, very little people on them, but lots of cattle on them. And now whether I came with my sister or whether she came and met me off the boat in Birkenhead, I'm not sure. But she thinks, I asked her, and she thinks she came and met me and that I actually came on the boat on my own.
Bridget, not her real name, also travelled that lonely journey by boat from Dublin to Liverpool.
So I came to Liverpool all alone on a boat and slept on the floor and arrived at the pierhead with this trunk and got a taxi all the way to Birkenhead because I was going to train in Birkenhead. The reason for that being that they didn't ask for an interview. I was just given a position, to train for general nursing, the RGN. And so that's where I ended up in Birkenhead, in the nurses' home, full of Irish nurses, and had a lovely time, a whale of a time. So I started my training there, and I loved it. I just loved nursing so much. I loved the general nursing.
Bridget felt it was the most direct route to Liverpool from Ireland.
I think it was the nearest thing to Ireland, and it was easy to get across on the boat.
Mary was offered nurse training places in London, but she turned them all down in favour of Liverpool because it was nearer to Ireland.
I applied to a few places. I got into Guy's. I could have gone to Guy's. I could have gone to New Cross. Is New Cross in Wolverhampton or Birmingham? And this one. And I decided to come here because it was the nearest to Ireland to get home, basically.
Nurse training was tougher in her day than it is now.
It's all right, it was hard. It's not the same these days, is it?
It was made easier when so many of the other students were also from Ireland, or from home, we used to call it.
Oh yes, there was loads of Irish nurses.
Mary remembers the Liverpool bus drivers would let the nurses go on the bus for free.
They used to, yeah, the drivers, because we were in the nursing home for a while, and then we got a flat, the three of us together, and the drivers always let you on the bus for free. They wouldn't do it now.
Because they knew you were a
nurse.
Yeah.
And they'd always let you on for free. That was nice of them, wasn't it? They wouldn't do it now.
But how did they know you were a nurse?
Because they knew where you were going. You had your uniform on sometimes, you see, and they'd let you on. Go on. That was a bonus, really, wasn't it?
That was a bonus. So were you proud of being a nurse, Mary?
Yeah, I am actually.
The Irish nurses' contribution to the NHS was appreciated.
Because they weren't frightened of work and they got on with people, really. So it wasn't hard work for them, if you like, because they probably got used to us all. And, in Ireland, everybody got on well. Absolutely, we weren't frightened of work and we mixed well. Yeah, they said that the Irish nurses were the best, yeah.
She remembers her nursing career fondly.
So that was really good. Nice to work on the wards, and we're all friendly together, and we learned from each other, and we used to have students on the ward as well, which was good. I found that was very good because it made me keep up to date with the correct nursing care, and I always explained to them as well what it was about, and I used to give little talks about setting up a trolley to do any dressings, or if the doctor was going to do a lumbar puncture or something like that. But the doctor would tell the patient and then he'd walk off. You could see the patient like draining. So obviously our job was to explain to the patient what they were going to do, you see, as well. But that's them, and we're there to do the job that we're trained to do. And as I said, because of our manners and respect, we were halfway there.
John arrived in Merseyside in his early 20s. He is now in his 90th year and he considers Liverpool his home now, although he hasn't forgotten his Irish roots.
Because I feel with being here so long, I'm accepted. You don't get any discrimination. in Liverpool, and there's so many Irish people here.
John goes on to explain the importance of having the Irish Centre in Liverpool as a meeting place for the many generations of Irish people who've made Liverpool their home.
I'm in the Irish Club mainly at weekends, so I'm mixing still with Irish people, you know. And although people who go there are mainly second and third generation Irish, but we all muck in, we accept them as, you know, there's no discrimination between born Irish or second and third generation Irish. And I always say, if it wasn't for the second generation Irish, we wouldn't have the club, because they're more active in organising us, you know. So, you know, we get on very well, everyone. And I like going there at the weekend, watch the football, like from Ireland, and big matches and that, you know.
Yeah.
And on the first Thursday and the third Thursday of the month, we have what we call an afternoon tea dance. And we have an entertainer, singer, and playing the guitar or the rocks.
Yeah.
And it's quite well attended, you know.
Many participants describe going dancing into the Irish centres, where they often met their future partners, as John recalled.
In the city, there was 2 or 3 dance halls, but there was, especially for the Irish, there was an Irish club of sorts. But it was before the main one opened. The main one opened a few years after in Mount Pleasant, but this was an unofficial Irish place, and it was upstairs in the centre of Liverpool, about 6 flights of stairs up, you know. And they used to call it the Shamrock, that was the name of it. It was mainly Irish then, you know, that men and women, you know. And a lot of men and women, they met their wives and partners there, you know.
It wasn't all just work. There was play too. Margaret found her ballroom of romance upstairs in the Odeon Cinema, no less.
With my husband at ballroom dancing lessons at the Odeon Cinema in Liverpool, and they had a room upstairs. And because I was in a nurse's home on my own at the time, there was another girl joined me then later, but she was older than me. Anyhow, you could go down to Liverpool, get the bus, and it was safe. So that's what I did. And so my hubby was my partner and continued to be my partner. And it was a long romance. We learned together. And of course, it was ideal for, you know, the rest of our lives to dance. And he used to call us Fred Astaire with Ginger Rogers.
That is just a little taster of the podcast that we're going to be producing or launching. And it's a series of podcasts. We're going to be doing 12 podcasts, over one every month being launched from July the 5th, which is NHS Day as far as I'm concerned. And it just brings to life their stories, and it'll be narrated, and we'll have some lovely Irish music as well being played with each podcast. So I look forward to launching them. They'll be all streamed on all the different social media platforms as well, so they can be got that way. But somebody asked me there a few earlier on, what does pod mean? And it's portable on delivery. Seems very technical, but it's just something that you can just get on the internet. But we can download them and make CDs as well for anybody who'd like them as well, and I can send them to Breach as they're being launched and as they're being produced every month for the next 12 months. Thank you very much.
So we thought it would seem very strange for us to be just talking about the nurses when in fact there are some lovely ladies, several lovely ladies in the room. But Mary kindly agreed to come up and have a chat. So we're just going to talk very generally about some of the experiences that Irish nurses who came to Liverpool in the 60s and 70s would have had. So maybe I could first of all begin by welcoming you, and thank you very much, Mary.
Thank you.
Thank you for agreeing to do this.
Coerced.
Coerced, you were not coerced. And maybe you could just begin by telling us, Mary, about that journey. Were you one of the people who came in the cattle boat?
No, I came a bit later. There was no animals on board, but there was nowhere to sleep, and we were on the floor, sleeping on the floor. And I'm not sure who else was on the boat, but there was no cattle.
No cattle, good.
That I remember, that I can remember anyway.
So what year did you come over, Mary?
68, 1968, yes.
And what hospital were you coming to then?
So I came to train in Birkenhead, in St Catherine's in Birkenhead, because I think maybe it's been mentioned already that I didn't have to come for an interview. I was offered a place in the training and I came to Birkenhead.
Yeah. And did you see an ad in the paper, or how did you know about it?
Yes, I'm guilty of the Northern Constitution, which was a paper in the north of Ireland, in Coleraine, which was sort of local to my area. And that's where I saw the advert. And there was also, that's where I saw that I didn't need an interview. And I came across and never looked back.
And tell us about the nurses' home. What was that like?
The nurses' home was the best place, I thought, because I came from rural Ireland and had very little social life. I just thought it was the best place ever. Lots of Irish girls, lots of Irish, some overseas as well, but mostly Irish girls. So it was just like home from home, really, and everybody. I'm supposed to be talking to you, aren't I?
No, you're not. You're talking to the people. You're doing absolutely the right thing.
So the nurses' home, we did have fun, and we did have a home sister, so that if we weren't supposed to be out, it was useful to have somebody to leave a window open or something like that. And we did climb in through the windows and stuff like that. We didn't get caught, fortunately. And that was it. We used to come over to the Irish Centre in Liverpool at Mount Pleasant. A lot of dancing and new friends, things like that. I didn't meet a partner though. But I did have a friend from Northern Ireland who was a male nurse, and we had a lot of fun. Oh, I'm not gone. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So getting back to the nurses' home, I said to Mary that we wouldn't get personal.
So there you are, failed already.
No. But so getting back to the nurses' home, Mary, because some people have said to us it was a bit like a boarding school. Did you feel that you were kind of controlled in some ways there?
Yes, there were rules and regulations, and we had to go for meals at certain times and go to bed and put the lights out and things like that, all at certain times. So it was a bit like controlled.
Yeah.
Yes, not too bad though, not too bad.
So there was a dining room and all the meals were provided?
That's right, exactly, which again was luxury. You didn't have to cook or do anything like that. It was lovely, yeah. And the laundry was done for you. Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it was more like a hotel than a boarding school, but yeah. So then tell us about the training, because we've heard about how in those days the training was more or less on the wards. You were learning on the job. And what was that like, Mary?
It was scary, very scary. And you were just thrown in at the deep end, and the ward sister would say, if you don't know how to do it, go and find out, and come back and when you found out and do whatever tasks. But the support was there from the other girls who were senior, etc. And so the support was there all the time, and we just got on with the job, really.
Yeah.
And it was so, I don't know, it wasn't easy, but it was enjoyable. It was hard work, and you had the bedpans, etc., as well as everything else. But generally, the patients themselves were such interesting people, and really could do what they could to help the student nurses.
Because they would know that you were student nurses, wouldn't they, by the uniform as well?
That's right, yes,
yeah.
So the patients were often helping us, telling us what to do or not to do.
The patients were telling you what to do.
Yeah, or not to do. No, you mustn't. Matron's watching.
So tell us about the matron, because I think for those of us who aren't nurses, we kind of have that image that you'd see on television or from the Carry On films of these really very strict matrons, and tell us what the matron's like.
Matron was very strict. I think that's all I can say about it. She just ensured that the patient got the best possible care there was. And the beds were in a straight line, of course, and the corners were done properly on the beds, and everybody had what they required, and also made sure that you were dressed properly, and your uniform was, in the right place, and the hats particularly.
So tell us about the uniform. Tell us about the hats, Mary.
The hats, first of all, is making it up in the first place. How do you make this hat up? Took me a long time to learn how to put it together and clip it on my head. It fell off a lot of times, but the other girls helped as well. Just everybody just helped. But if it wasn't straight, matron would tell you. It wasn't straight, and it perhaps needed another clip. But the uniform was sort of as a student, and then the apron with the bib on, and trying to put everything on in the morning and get out on time was another, because it was quite fiddly, and the belts, and it was. But once you were dressed, you felt really dressed. And I must admit, I loved the cape with the red lining, and talk about getting on the bus with the red cape, because we had a short journey from the nurses' home to the hospital, and we didn't pay any fares. We just got there, got on the bus, and got to the hospital. Yeah.
Wow.
And the red cape was amazing, just amazing. Yeah.
So you felt very special when you put the uniform on.
Very special, yes.
Yeah. So then it was 3 years of training, and then your uniform changed every year, or your belt?
The
or your
belt
buck-
changed,
yeah.
and you would get an epaulette as well, and for different years, first year, second, third year, yes.
Yeah.
And you felt very proud to be sort of progressing.
Yeah.
And getting to, but we did a lot of studying as well, but it was ward-based and 6 weeks in school, and the rest, just blocks. Yeah.
Yeah, and then exams as well.
Oh, exams as well, yes.
Yeah, so it wasn't all fun.
Not all fun.
Hard work as well.
Hard work as well,
Yeah.
but it was just good, very good.
So Mary, why do you think so many Irish girls came over to Liverpool or to England more generally?
Well, I think a lot of it's been mentioned already. It was about the poverty in Ireland and the poor, after the war and things like that. There wasn't a lot of opportunities for girls in Ireland, or men either, the boys, but mostly for the girls, there wasn't opportunities, and it was about what you've mentioned already about the economics and the training you didn't have to pay for, and your uniform and everything was provided. And you got a good education, and the opportunities were amazing. So I think it's partly to do with getting a job and getting money and getting, because there was sort of in the families at home, there was not enough food and money and everything else. So it was about, as you mentioned, coming over and getting wages and sending some money home as well.
So how would you sum up the contribution that Irish nurses have made to the NHS, Mary?
That's tough. I don't know how you could put a value on it. I mean, obviously the Irish nurses had that sort of reputation for being kind, caring, hard-working and all of that. And that the contribution, I suppose, was about... I'm stuck now. Can somebody help me?
Oh, Mary said if she got stuck, she was either going to phone a friend or ask the audience. So, as phoning a friend might be a bit tricky, we could ask the audience as well. So we could throw that out if anybody feels they could. Yes, this commitment. Yeah, you think Irish nurses brought a particular commitment?
Yes,
yeah.
Yes, that's a good word. Yes.
Anybody else?
I think they helped to build the NHS.
Helped. Yeah, helped to build the NHS. Yeah.
What, sorry?
Yeah, helped to build the
Build the
NHS.
NHS.
Yes.
I think the contribution is still being made as well. Sorry, how feeling very emotional, as been said, all the stories you heard. My mother-in-law was Annie, and she came over up Capitol. This is Sue, my wife. My wife is a nurse, my brother is a nurse, and my son is a student nurse. And so the legacy of Annie went over on that Capitol, and I'm sure that story is the same for many of you in the room and across the country. And I work for Irish Community Care. I'm not of Irish heritage, but I wouldn't be working for Irish Community Care if Annie hadn't come over on that Capitol. So the contribution is enduring. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. That's lovely. Thank you.
That's true. I
Yes.
just couldn't get the words. I was lost.
Well, it's a group effort, Mary. It's a
Oh,
group
yes,
effort.
yes.
So thank you very much.
Can I go
Mary.
now?
Mary has been wonderful, and it just means so much to hear it coming directly from Mary. You've heard it from us, but I think coming from the nurse herself. So a big round of applause for Mary.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.